Hello, it's Scott Manley here. Now, ever since the release of Kerbal Space Program 0.90 beta, I've had a bunch of people asking for some new tutorials specifically covering contracts and the administration building, the strategies. So this is going to be a little bit of coverage here. It's going to be at a pretty low level, but you might learn some stuff here. So I'm just going to start a regular game on normal difficulty. If you're a newbie, I strongly suggest you go through the training to make sure you have all the concepts all set up. Picking a nice flag here, let's go for ESA. And we're going to start in career mode on medium difficulty, or normal difficulty. So we get a nice little warning, or nice little bit of information from Gene Kerman. Feel free to read that. Now, if you look at the buildings now, you can right click on them and it'll tell you what the buildings allow you to do. Interesting ones to be aware of is the astronaut complex. At the basic level, Kerbals can only disembark on Kerbin. That means they can't go on EVA, and EVA, as you know, is very helpful for packing as much science as possible into a mission. Now, if I'm to upgrade it with the 70,000 funds upgrade, they will be able to perform EVAs in space, which will help. If you right click on the vehicle assembly building, it tells you can't have more than 30 parts without an upgrade. That's not going to be a problem for a while. The tracking station, the orbits are going to be visible in the map, but when you upgrade it, you will be able to see patched conics. The difference being that as you transit from one sphere of influence into another, I'm guessing the upgraded facility won't show you those further orbits after you've left the sphere of influence. Right-clicking on the launch pad tells us there is a max vessel size and a max vessel weight. So until you upgrade this, which is a cheap upgrade, you won't be able to launch any more than 18 tons. And the one that we're really going to be interested in starting at is the mission control, where you're going to select missions. Now, active contracts are limited now based upon your level of this building. And you can only select two, and the only two you want to select are launch a vessel and set an altitude record. The reason being that escaping the atmosphere automatically qualifies for all previous altitude records. So if you escape the atmosphere and go into orbit on the first mission, you will not be able to do these altitude records, which means you're missing out on potential cash, right? So for each altitude record, there's a completion reward, and that is helpful. It goes into your bank account and lets you upgrade everything. So early on in the game, getting as much money as possible is actually very, very helpful. So I suggest you build a mission that just breaks 5,000, and then you'll get another contract for like 11,000, and so on and so forth. So we're going to accept launch a new vessel, and we're going to accept set an altitude record. Great. So we're going to go and we're now going to build the simplest rocket ever. Werner von Kerman has some hints for us. You should probably read those. Now we've got a capsule. Since we're going to be putting crew in it, you want to put the parachute on this. That'll appear down in the staging diagram in the bottom right corner. Now for engines, you can have a fuel tank powering a liquid fuel engine, but I strongly suggest you don't do this on your first mission, because there's a pretty good chance that with that tiny parachute you're going to land too hard and break your engine or your booster. So the engine is 850, whereas the solid rocket booster costs 325. This will be a lot cheaper if you lose a solid rocket booster, so I would suggest that. But furthermore, since we're aiming for this magic 5,000 meter altitude, you want to cut back the amount of fuel in here to, I see, just about 260, 259.8. Before you launch, you want to have these on separate stages. And finally, I would suggest adding a little antenna here, the communitron. You can stick that on the side. It looks offset, but because this is a physicsless part, we are not going to be worried about the mass changing. So let's launch. Incidentally, actually, yeah, down here, this is the craft statistics here. It tells you how heavy it is. This is very important. If any of these things turn red, it is too big for the launch pad. Okay, so we're ready to go. First thing we're going to do though is we're going to do a crew report from the pad to get some science, and we're going to transmit this right away. And there's a little transmitter coming out there transmitting all that scientific goodness. It does, however, use electric charge, so on this mission I can only afford one transmission. But it does free up a slot to collect more data. Now, I talked about the engines getting destroyed on landing under a parachute. Well, there's one way that you can actually beat that here. If you zoom out, you're probably aware that there's the ocean right there. If we can hit the ocean and hit our 5,000 meter mark, then we will have everything alive and we will be much happier. So on launch, I'm going to immediately press the D key and bring my rocket over so it's pointing roughly about 65, between 60 and 70 here. To keep it stable, I'm going to enable SAS, Stability Assist System. There you can see the white light coming up here. That means Jebediah will try to keep us flying in a straight line. So I'm going to ready hit space and then immediately turn using the D key. And there we go. And if you overshoot, you have the A key. So there we go, we're shooting upwards, and this is a good time to right-click on the capsule and collect that crew report. The shores look inviting and you watch the waves roll into the coast. So I'm going to keep that data now because I don't have the electrical charge. Our rocket has burned out and we have passed the 5,000 meter mark. That's pretty good. You can see our velocity vector here on the nav ball is starting to go downwards. Getting lower and lower, and soon we shall be falling downwards. This is my vertical speed indicator up the top here. There, now we are starting to fall back to the ocean, and we are in fact over the ocean. So as you're falling, before you hit the ocean, you probably want to deploy your parachute. I've just disabled the stability assist system for the reason I actually want to save the electrical power because it will help rotate the capsule. And when I land in the water, I might want to turn the capsule into an orientation which is appropriate for some further study. So I'm going to use time acceleration to go down. You probably want to be a little more careful than me, but I just want to get this over with. You don't time accelerate through 500 meters because parachute opening, which happens at 500 meters above the surface, can be actually very destructive if you let that happen at full speed, at full 4 times time acceleration. Okay, and I'm going to again time accelerate and take it out of time acceleration just before I hit the surface so that the physics doesn't mess me up. Okay, so we're in the water, and this is a new biome now, right? So you can collect science, the same type of science for every biome. This is splashed down in the water. So I can right click and perform a crew report. The problem is there is already a crew report there. If I click on crew report, it will say overwrite existing crew report. You do not want to do that. You've collected it from the air. Cancel that. So you can only have one active piece of experimental data. However, the capsule can store experimental data from other experiments, and you can have multiple copies in there. But to actually do that, you have to send an astronaut on EVA to collect the data and then have them put the data in the pod. So this is a very weird little dance that we have to do here. We have to get Jebediah out on EVA, see in the bottom right there. Now he's sitting on the capsule. Technically he's actually flying according to the game, which is a little confusing. But we have to right click on the capsule to take the data. Now he has the experiments in it, and I can review the stored data on Jebediah. Now I can either board or I can just right click and store experiments. So now the experiment has moved from the active slot into the stored slot, and we'll be able to do a crew report again. While we're out here, we can also collect an EVA report by right clicking on Jebediah. Now he actually is, according to the game, he is flying over Kerbin's water, which he considers to be quite a precarious situation. So let's keep that data. Let's store that and get it by getting inside, pressing the F key. And now we're here, we can actually perform the crew report again. And we are now doing a crew report from Kerbin's water. So we've got more science than we would have otherwise had if we hadn't done that EVA. Going to keep that, and then there's one last thing I want to do. I'm going to roll the capsule onto its side like that, again using SAS to stop it. EVA out, and he'll now swim in the water. You could swim around and say, look, I'm swimming in a spacesuit. That makes total sense, right? And he can do another EVA report, but now he is in the water, so he will collect an EVA report from Kerbin's water. I don't think a spacesuit was entirely necessary. So swim up to the capsule, and assuming you're near the hatch, press F and F again, and you're on board, and you've now maximized the science you can get from this mission. So you can recover it and feel your victory. Okay, look, it tells you where we got science on this mission. We got 5 different science reports. We got 25 science in total. We recovered the vessel and a number of parts, so we get money back from the vessel parts. We only get 97% of the value because the closer you are to Kerbal Space Center, the larger proportion of cash you get back. But we're still close enough that it's helpful, and so that's a bit of cash that comes back. We only spent about 1,356 on this rocket. And Jebediah Kerman, he has 1 experience point, so that will help him become a better Kerbal. Now, up in the top right, you can take a look at the contract completion messages, which is great. We'll just discard this. Launch a new vessel, great. Now, we have science up here. We want to spend the science. We spend the science in the R&D center. All things being equal, you should have enough to unlock the first node, which gives you decouplers, which are very helpful, and the mystery goo containment unit. You can also, I strongly suggest going for survivability as your first one, because it adds radial mount parachutes, which means you can add more parachutes to your vehicles and therefore land heavier loads. This is very, very useful thing to have. Liquid fueled engine and the landing struts are kind of nice for building landers later. So I'm going to research those, and now we don't have enough cash to unlock the other nodes. So let's go back, and now we're going to pick out some new contracts for this mission. So now we have another altitude record. So we're going to do that. The next altitude record after this is 22,000, so you want to go between 11,000 and 22,000. Don't bother with these ones. See if any of these things actually work. And you know what? None of these... Oh, this is going to work, yes. We can test a solid fuel booster landed at Kerbin, which is what we're using, right? The RT-10. Visual surveys, you will have to fly over a target, and you gotta fly below this altitude at a specific location. Until you get plane parts, these ones on Kerbin can be kind of hard. If you're not sure how to do a contract, don't accept it, because you will then have to abandon it and lose. You'll pay the, you'll pay the failure cost. Although, that matches up with your advance, you will lose a little bit of reputation. This is the reputation bar in the middle. Let's close that off. So we've selected these 2 things. Okay, so we want to go above 11,000 now, right? We're going to use the same rocket because it's actually going to work pretty well here. And what I want to add to it, first of all, is more fuel. Add this fuel in. And we want to add, under science, we have the mystery goo. We're going to add a couple of these to it. The mystery goo is actually, it sticks onto the side, unlike other parts. And since it sticks onto the side, it will cause your thing to flip around. So you want to make sure you put this on symmetrically by pressing the X key, and you can see in the bottom left there is a little symmetry mode. So you can make it as many of those as you like. 2 is a good number. And since we're going to be landing back on the surface, we probably want 2 parachutes as well. So with these extra parachutes, we should be able to land this whole thing safely. And we should, in theory, be able to exceed the 11,000 target. Let's launch it and see what happens. Okay, and we're ready to go. Now we could, if we want to go higher, we can adjust our thrust, but I think we're ready to go. No, we could try aiming. Yeah, we should aim a little to the left here this time. So I'm going to go slightly to the left, because that might take us out over grasslands. We should collect a mystery goo science while we're flying. The goo jiggles and wobbles as the craft flies, so we'll keep that data. Now we can do another crew report, but we already have crew report from Kerbin Shore, so there's not much for us to gain. But hopefully we'll come out over these grasslands and be able to collect some data in a minute. We're starting to move pretty fast here, 500 meters per second. Will that get us over the 11,000 meter mark? Who knows? 10,000... Yeah, as you see, judged us almost right. There, we got both missions, both contracts complete. So we got that for 5,000, and we got the testing. The testing contract is pretty weak in terms of cash, but it is advantageous to do this. So we're still going up. We're about to start falling down. Now, can I do a crew report? There, we're flying now, flying over Kerbin's grasslands, and you can see my house from here. Great, we're going to keep that data. And as we're falling back, time to activate the parachutes and time accelerate down to the surface. So different experiments have different rules. The mystery goo will just tell you that they're flying at Kerbin. So that's actually, you don't get different biomes when you're flying. Yeah, that's fine. I just thought, I thought for a second my parachute had deployed, and I get very concerned because parachutes falling off are very unfortunate. And about 1,000. We're moving down at about 80 meters per second. As soon as those parachutes open, we will be much safer. There we go. So let that get down to the surface. You can see the shadow as you're coming down. Shadow is extremely helpful during landing because it lets you figure out how far away from the surface you are. From the outside, this altitude is relative to sea level. The ground itself is above sea level, so you will hit it before this goes to zero, and that's very important to know when you're trying to land on other planets. There we go, and touchdown. And we've fallen over. Okay, yeah, you want to make sure you fall over onto your back here, because if you fall over face down, you will not be able to get out. So I can observe the mystery goo from the ground. Yes, I observe the goo from the grasslands. I'm going to keep that data. And we can do a crew report now. Sorry, we have a crew report, of course. Sorry, so we got an EVA. We got to do this trick again. Take the data, store the experiments, and yeah, he can collect an EVA report about flying over Kerbin. Store that. Do the crew report again. So that's extra science, extra science, extra science. Keep that data. And EVA once again. Now, we can try and get some science off the ground here. We might not be able to get back into the pod. That's why I went back into the pod first to do the crew report. So that's a little more science. We can't plant flags yet. We don't have that option. Now, you can try running in there. So I'm going to try this. Run in and space. Ugh. Didn't quite work. Maybe I can run over the side of this. Oh, there. That totally worked. Of course, there's no advantage to being recovered inside the capsule. But I'm doing it nevertheless. So recover the vessel. Okay, so this is another 29 science. That's excellent. And again, all the reports of parts. And you know what? I made a very silly mistake there. I should have flown with a different astronaut. Instead, I flew with Jebediah. Remember that experience point? Well, you should be spreading those around because he won't get more experience from repeating the same thing that he's previously done. He has to do new things. So, yeah, thing that I forgot to do there. Okay, so over at the mission control once again, we have 2 more contracts. We can set an altitude record, and you're gonna just have to keep doing this. This is the best way to build your cash reserves up, is by doing all of these. Oh, we could test the bigger solid rocket booster while landed at Kerbin. That might be interesting. We could test a Sepatron while splashed down. We could test things in flight. Now, testing things in flight is hard because you have to make sure you have the correct altitude. We have this option to test the LVT-45 liquid fuel engine. That's probably a good one because it means we do it at landing, and it means we can actually start building rockets with a liquid fueled engine. So let's actually do that one. Now, of course, one other thing to know is that if you're flying, you can hit the escape key and revert the flight if you perhaps go way over 22,000 or way under. So yeah, let's go to the R&D lab and use this new science. Now, you can try to go off down this direction if you like. This is the Science Junior is a nice part for collecting more science. Or you can spread your, send your stuff this way. We have general rocketry. This is the LVT-45, which I was going to test. So here we go, stability, yeah, we'll go for this one, because that has sepatrons and bacts and things like that. Okay, so we want to build a spacecraft to exceed 22 kilometers, but not by much. So I'm going to replace this with the LVT-45 liquid fuel engine. You will need to give it fuel tanks. And I think to get to 22 kilometers you need a tank and you need a half tank, and then you stick the engine underneath it and the fuel drains into the engine and makes it go faster. I'm still going to put these goo experiments on here. They will be useful, and you again want to make sure that you've split your staging into the correct stages. And I think also before we go, we're going to go to the crew tab and we're going to change out Bob or Jebediah with Bill, right, so that they're all getting experience for these suborbital launches. So with this engine, you can actually throttle the engine to make sure that you don't fly too fast or too slow. You're going to want to use the shift key to maximize your thrust, right? This is your throttle here. Enable stability control. Oh, it says I have no operational SAS because the pilot does not have pilot skills. That means you're going to have to learn to fly it yourself. That is a potential downside, I guess, to switching out controls. So Bill isn't a pilot, he is an engineer, so just don't touch the controls. The only thing to do is now watch your velocity. Once it reaches about 150, you want to throttle back a bit, and you want to try and use the various controls to keep it pointing upwards. So this might actually be too much for you. If you can't do this, if you can't adjust your throttle and adjust the controls at the same time, just switch back to Jebediah and use the stability control system. So the reason I'm throttling back is that as you're going through the atmosphere, in the lower atmosphere is very thick. See this blue bar? That is your atmospheric pressure. And that drag slows you down. And if you have too much drag, you may not hit the altitude you need. So I'm going to keep it below about 200, keep it rising slowly, but keep it below 250 until I get above about 10 kilometers. So now I'm going to let it start to build up, and then as I'm about to run out of fuel, I'm going to throttle up to maximum just to make sure I cross the threshold going as quickly as possible. So yeah, now's a good time. We're above 14 kilometers, the fuel's about to run out, and there, we're going at half a kilometer per second, and that velocity should carry us over the 22 kilometer mark. In fact, it might carry us even further, which could be a problem. Now, by travelling higher, we've now entered a new biome, and new biomes means new scientific data. So I can do another crew report from here, and it tells me I'm getting a crew report from the upper atmosphere. Yeah, I'm going really, really high. I might actually break through my next altitude barrier, which means I will lose science. I'm going to transmit this data because it's good to get it out of here since I've got excess charge. I'm going to also collect mystery goo. There we go. The goo seems to be getting very cold. Yes, over 30 kilometers. Yeah, we're going to exceed 30 kilometers. So that's actually, pretty easy. If you have trouble, it might be, if you don't manage that, it might be that you didn't adjust your throttle particularly well. Or it might be that you were too slow. There's a definite balance here. And so you can see that adjusting your throttle can actually make a difference. Now on the way down, I can press the space bar to deploy the parachutes, but they won't actually deploy until they reach a minimum atmospheric pressure, right? So the minimum pressure is 0.1, and you'll see at about 20 kilometers, 21 kilometers, the parachutes will actually deploy and bring everything down. And those parachutes will then, of course, they will be partially deployed. There we go, 23 kilometers, that was pretty close. So let's bring this all the way down to the surface, and we'll continue the little science dance. And hopefully you're getting an idea of how we're completing these altitude-based contracts here. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Again, 500 is the magic mark. If you time accelerate over that, you can find yourself in trouble. Crew report will be over grasslands, or it might be over the grasslands. Yeah, reset. We don't need to worry about that. So I'm going to just land this on the surface. and we're moving at 6.1 meters per second, which should be okay. We've already collected all the science we can from the grassland, so no point in doing the little EVA dance. The only thing we can collect is a little more of this. Observe mystery goo. There we go. Recover the vessel. And we see we got a little more mystery goo data, which will help us just a little bit. 29 science. And we have 50,000 funds. And Bill Kerman gained experience. And we've got more reputation. You know, we now have enough reputation. We could start a fundraising campaign. And the advantage of that, we can get up to, I think 25% commitment is the limit you can reach on this. We obviously can't do it here, but the idea behind the fundraising campaign is that it takes your reputation, which most people don't really care about too much, and it turns it into money. So this is a good strategy early on when you're trying to build out your base, but I'm not going to do that just yet. It's a concept, but I think I want more reputation. Now, before we go to the next altitude record, there's some other science you can actually grab. So we've got this here, and we said, we have 30 science. We would really like to unlock this node, because this unlocks the Science Junior. It will give us more science, so therefore we want to collect science so we can get the science, so we can collect more science, so we can unlock everything. Science is good. Now, there's a super cheap way to get some free science, essentially. What you do is that each of these locations, the runway, the flagpoles, the buildings, the launch pad, they're all considered biomes, so you can collect data from them relatively easily. So let's just go to the spaceplane hangar. Now, we're not going to build a spaceplane, but we can admire the interior. We're just going to put a command pod in, and it's on its side, so we can flip this that way up. And we have science experiments, right? We have the mystery goo containment units. We'll stick a couple of those on there. Now, remember what I said about recovery? Recovery gives you 100%. So I can just put a crew, put Bob Kerman, the scientist, in instead. How about that? And so here we're going to launch. Well, launch as in we're not going to go anywhere. There's no engines on it, but we can collect the science. We can collect the mystery goo. We can do that twice and keep that data. We can do a crew report. And that gives us reporting into the runway. Good thing there's not a lot of air traffic, because I don't think we ever get clearance from the tower to be here. And of course you can EVA outside. The flying is stuff that you already have. Oh, actually flying over Kerbal shores. Let's keep that data. And board. Now we can repeat the process over at the launch pad. We can collect an EVA report from the surface. I don't think whatever is very good. Store that in there, and here's a thing, as I've mentioned, all these areas are different biomes. So I can run over to the crawlway, which is going to contain different types of scientific data. So I can stop here, and I can, of course, do an EVA report and get another couple of points of science, and run all the way back. So, this is free because we're going to recover all the hardware for 100% recoverability, which, of course, means it's free science. Free science is good because that science can now be spent in the R&D lab getting the data, getting the instrument, the Science Max or whatever, the Science Junior, which will let us collect even more science, and science means hardware, and hardware means better and bigger rockets. So yes, this has more or less been a guide to kind of min-maxing the start of the Kerbal Space Program career. Hope it's been useful to new players and old players. See you around sometime. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.